how do nonprofits handle forecasting grant revenue? We've reignited our grant strategy, and from what we can tell, some grant opportunities appear to be long shots and others appear to be highly likely. The lack of predictability makes it difficult, though, when preparing our budget for next year.
Oh, these budget questions. Oh my goodness, right? It's everyone's.
Is it budgeting time?
Right?
It must be budgeting time.
It must be budgeting time. Fiscal year starting July 1. Yeah.
Fiscal year starting July 1.
Oh,
yeah.
I wonder. Oh, what a surprise. No, it's a great, I have heard a lot of people who rely on grants struggle with this because particularly grants can be less predictable than individual donors in many cases. So, and funders can change. I mean, let's first talk about all the variables that you're talking about for lack of predictability, and for the other listeners, right? Like the relationship with the funder, how closely you align with the funder's giving priorities, whether if those giving priorities or funding priorities are going to change in the next year. What is how's your impact, the metrics, your outcomes that you have to share, all of these, as well as how well the proposal's written, right? So all of these influence the grant decision, which is what can make it really tricky, right? Because it's not just about usually a relationship sometimes, but not always. And so I think starting with a probability-based kind of like methodology is the way I would approach this, is really thinking like I'd put together a grant calendar and say, here's what we're going to go pursue this next year, knowing that again can be fluid because things come up. You might hear of other opportunities, but again, your best guess, like here's what we think we have time and capacity to apply for. Let's map that out as best we can. And then let's look at the probability of these using whatever criteria. You can use the ones I just mentioned, but like how probable do we think this is, right? Like, is this like a dependable source or completely far-fetched? And I would just then come up with, that matrix, that spreadsheet, whether you're like a 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 score for probability or likelihood. And then you get to kind of like decide, or you put a percentage, like I think there's a 75% probability. So I think that's the way I would structure it. I also think if it helps, there's a lot of, there's been data collected from sources out there about likelihood of getting grants. And the data is all over the map, to be quite frank. I've seen, some data that talks about, you should expect 30 to 60% success for a first time funding request, and data that says 10 to 30%. So I will say just at least, and again, depending on your climate, like what community you live in, how many funders there are, how many other competing nonprofits in your area there are, like all that, again, that can be part of your criteria. But I in general think like for first time grants, I usually think of a 10 to 20% probability, because it's usually pretty low for a first time grant. And then it just starts to, for something that's more of a given, or like something you have a long standing, you've gotten the grant year over year, I'd probably be closer to like that's 80 to 100% probability. Like, so I think some of it is your best guess, but it's based on a lot of data and knowledge in your relationship and the criteria you set. So that's my long-winded answer. How about you, Andy?
No, I think that's exactly how I do it too. So I even take it a step further, and when I'm putting together a full budget, I multiply the likelihood by how much we're asking for to give us a likely amount of how much we're going to receive. And what that does is if you've got a few grants, it doesn't work very well, because then you just don't have enough data for it to really make sense. But if you do have several grants and you're going after a bunch of them, a lot of times by having those percentages multiplied by what you're asking for, you can come up with a number that's pretty close to what you're actually going to receive, just the way the math works out. It seems like magic until you've done it a couple of times. You're like, it really does work, right? It's the sort of the law of averages and also and I've said this before, like how good development people are at telling you what percentage likelihood you are to get a particular gift. Like they can look at it and they can say, I think this is a 20%er. And you truly then have a 20% chance of getting that gift. So if you're asking for $10,000 and it's 20%, that goes in the budget for $2,000. So it sort of minimizes the damage that you do to your budget if you don't get it. It's only $2,000 off. And in theory, it's fixed by the one you thought was 80%, which was discounted to 80%, which you get a little bit more from that. So you see if you get more grants stacked up, this is much easier to describe using a spreadsheet or a whiteboard.
It really is.
But if you've got a lot of grants like that are working together like that, you sort of, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You've got a lot of eggs. And so in that case, you kind of come up with a number that's really, really pretty close. You need to kind of keep an eye out. There's ways it can break. Like there's a 1% chance we get $10 million. That's going to be a big dollar amount that goes in your budget and a very, very low likelihood. So sometimes you really need to just kind of go, well, 1% is really 0%. So we're gonna just assume that this one's not going to go in at all. I think that's a really powerful method. I use that for all of my revenue budgets, like anything that's revenue coming in. We use that percentage likelihood and then multiply those two numbers together. And surprisingly, like you don't think it's going to work necessarily. And I'm always surprised at how close we come every time we do it that way.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my partner in crime, Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer a bunch of nonprofit questions that you send us. And you do that by emailing them to us or finding us on one of the socials if you can figure out how to do that. It's usually at Nonprofit Everything. That's usually a good guess is where to find us on those. Also, if you're on the Nonprofit Everything webpage, there's a nice Ask a Question button that you can click, and that'll go straight to us as well. Stacey, what are you excited? Are you going on vacation this summer? Are you doing anything fun at all?
The way you asked that kind of made it sound like you think I'm doing nothing fun at all, Andy.
Really? I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Am I really that
weird.
much of a dud? No, just kidding. I do work a lot, folks, so I understand where his question's coming from. No, I actually am going to do I have a work trip to Colorado, but might add a couple of fun days while I'm there. And then in July, I think I'm going on a girls trip with my mom and her bestie, and we're gonna go to wine country in California. So excited about that. It'll just be a few days, so nothing major, but enough to get away. How about you?
Yeah, we got a couple little things planned. Nothing too exciting. No big vacations. I think we're feeling the economy right now, to be honest. So, but it's nice to have the kids out of school. That'll be fun.
Yes. Well, see, you've got kids. I think you say it's nice now, but what I really want to know is if you'll be saying that in another month or 2 months, you'll be like, let them go back.
Oh yeah. By the time school starts to come around again, I'm very excited about kids being back in school for sure.
It sounds awful, but all my friends with kids, like they love the summertime with the kids at the first few weeks. And then it's like, I'm over it. It just like holiday breaks and all that stuff. So
Exactly. Well, enjoy the episode. Our nonprofit recently had a site visit with a potential funder, and we thought it went pretty well. We shared a folder with some key information about our organization, told them about our successes over the past year, and had plenty of data for any questions that arose. Just getting to the site visit stage was a big deal, and we were told by the potential funder that it was ours to lose, given how far we had gotten through their process. Sadly, the other day we got notice that we weren't approved. We're still puzzled by this, not to mention really disappointed. Do you think there's anything we could have done differently to be more successful? Do you have any experience on how to knock a site visit out of the park?
I do. I do. I would love to know if this was more focused on data, and you talk about we were prepared, right? We had the data ready. We had, we had folder with some key information. And what I would challenge you to think about is the fact that you've already given a lot of info up to this stage, it sounds like. And so how do you set yourself apart at this stage? And how you set yourself apart is with passion and energy and a really good story and with an experience. It's an experience at this point of how do you make that donor or funder feel that they can't feel just from looking at your folder or your data. And so relying too heavily, right? Like, and we're all guilty of it. It's like, great, like, let me give you more and more info and data. They already have all the data. They're here to sort of like see, like, I go on a site visit, Andy, for an organization. I want to look and see, do I get a sense of their culture? Do they, like, how does the vibe feel? Something which is hard to put, like, that sounds so, subjective, and it kind of is, but what does the vibe feel like? Does everyone seem like they're holed away in their office and no one's coming out, or like, hey, or like, because I'm going to tell you the difference. I've gone to site visits where you see someone where all the staff are like super friendly and like they're walking by, like you're walking by the hall, someone doesn't even know who you are and they're just like, hi, like, and you could just feel the way that like the environment in that organization. And then and then I've worked, I've gone to organizations where you go, no one introduces you to another person, like the executive, whoever you're meeting with, development director, executive director, they don't introduce you to another person. They just meet with you. You sit there in their conference room and they just meet with you. And it's just such a missed opportunity. And so I would also say, depending on your organization, do you have any visuals? Like, is there a video? Could you bring in a client? Could you just to share their story? Could you bring in the staff member who works with some of your clients or those you serve? There's just such a difference between intentionality and creating an experience than there is actually just sharing information, because I don't need to come to your office to get more information, right? I don't need to come to your site to get more info. And so I just think, if there's like a slideshow or videos or whatever, anything you can share, maybe you had a media story that you can throw up on the computer and show me something that like maybe I haven't seen that kind of brings it to life. If, depending on, I know some people don't have like the kind of space that you can really like take someone around and they see cool things, because it depends on the mission, right? So that's hard, right? Like I think people who don't have like the visual thing struggle with site visits more, because they're like, what do I show you? And I'm like,
this is the conference room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, woohoo, this is where we have our lunch, right? Like it's our employee cafeteria, whatever, our break room. So I just think, get creative here. Like, you've got to have some photos. You've got to have some stories. If you're lucky, maybe you have a video you could throw up there. And you also bring, if you are not naturally gifted at being that person with passion, energy, and enthusiasm, then get the person who is, whether it's your board member, whether it's a fellow staff member, because that is the person you need in this, not to be like, insincere or inauthentic, but someone who just naturally like you get near them and you go, I want more, like I want more of this energy. That's kind of what you're looking for. And it doesn't have to be that you put a ton of time and resource into this. Like, so I want to share like a very basic but cool story I had recently that I think could help people realize it's not about organization size. It's not about having a space. So I actually did a site visit not too long ago with a group that was, had a budget that was probably about $30,000, all volunteer, very grassroots. I think there's like a $5,000 stipend given to the volunteer executive director, something like, but like it's really minimal, right? And so you've got this, they work out of their home. And so even the site visit was kind of awkward, because it was like, well, we work out of our home. Do you want to come to one of our homes? And so, and I was just kind of like, no, let's meet at a coffee shop, right? Let's just go to a coffee shop that's kind of, convenient, and let's see how that and just get to talk to each other a little bit. So we did. And I'll tell you what, they showed up, this cute little group. I mean, I say cute, but I mean it with all funness. Like, there were 4 of them who were like these, like the most grassroots, like cool, passionate people that came together, and like one of them, like, not that, and I'm not saying you have to roll out this kind of red carpet because I don't expect this, but like one of them like rolled out the red carpet when I came to the coffee shop door, like they were standing right there. You must be, Miss Stacey. And I'm like, I am, right? It was like and so it just was this sort of vibe. And they had done so much. They had a little binder filled with all very old school paperwork. You could tell they're not digitally inclined, but they had every potential question that I asked. And I asked a lot at that meeting. They were like, oh, let's pull out the sheet on the binder. Oh, let's get this. Let's do that. And then they wanted to can we take a group photo and then send it to me afterward? Like that shows a group that has no money to do anything fancy, has no physical office, and I will never forget that site visit, Andy, because it was that powerful, right? Because it was people who were genuine, but were also doing it really smartly and really intentionally, even if it was in their own way for the types of communities they were trying to reach. They don't need fancy computers and digital equipment, which was hard for me to wrap my brain around because I kept looking at their binder and all the forms they do for different community events. And I just kept thinking, oh, this would be so much easier for you to track if you could do this on a computer or like a device, a tablet. But like, that's not who they are and not what they need right at this stage. They probably will down the road, but I just was like, cool for you. And like, it's working. It's working and the numbers were there to show it. So I don't know. There I go. I got off on my soapbox, but it's such an opportunity when you get there, right? Like, don't miss that opportunity.
So I think I have a question then. So again, because my lens is always like big organizations, right? It's like if we're doing a site visit, like I get to walk you across the stage and through the costume shop, or we're going to watch people packing bags to give to kids, right? It's about showing that the organization is just as professional as they thought it was, like that it's run really well and that their money is safe with us and we're going to do what we say we're going to do. But what I'm getting from you is something a little bit different. It's more for maybe organizations that don't have an operation that they're showing off. Like the purpose of a site visit is just vibes. Where are you going?
Yeah, no, I love the question. No, I think it's about, can they answer, like, can they still respond to the questions, but can they also and show me that there's some degree professionalism? Because I don't think I'm saying that should not exist. Like, I love what you just said, Andy, but I also think it's about, if I have only so many dollars and you tell me, like, you answer my questions very blandly, and I understand this is a personality thing. So there's but very blandly, here's the data, right? Like very monotone. I don't get to hear a story. I don't get to actually hear about help create the image for me of what your organization does that I can't read on paper. And whether that is a picture, whether that is through a verbal story, whether it's through we got this quote, or look, there's a few of us here. We just did this community event. I don't know, it shows me what I can't just get from reading. And so I think there is a visual piece of it, or at least a verbal, a storytelling piece of it. I think it's about showing me you're professional, but also just showing me that you actually have an enthusiasm, you care about your mission. If I meet with someone and don't feel like they actually are that excited about the mission, I don't care how professional they are. It's very much, they are going to be lower on the list than not because they haven't performed, but because I'm going to be it's just hard to not take that into consideration. So there is a subjective and objective piece, and I think both are important. That's what I think a site visit is more about, the emotional leaning in. Still, you can balance the professional piece with it. Does that help, or do you push back on that? Say, no, that's not cool. Okay.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I think, when you think about grant applications. A lot of times they're very black and white. It's Excel spreadsheets. They've given you God forbid, it's a web form that has like a limited number of characters that you can enter to. So like sometimes you've only been given the opportunity to provide a little bit of information. And this is the stage where you get to provide color to all that, right? I think that's what you're saying is that you've, the data and the questions and all that, you've gotten to this stage with the information. So now it's time to show why this organization is the right organization to receive the funding. And it could be vibes, but it could also just be, like you said, enthusiasm or, desire to show off like how happy you are to work there or what a great job everybody's doing. Or, I had somebody I used to work with was notorious for every time, like if there was any space on a thing, she'd want to stick a picture in it. Like even if the grant application was like, don't include any pictures, she'd like, just attach one anyway. Like, so there's always like some kind of visual or something that went along with it. And it's because she sort of recognized that people need to see that. They pretend like they only want the facts, but they really want the feelings. And you're saying that like, this is an opportunity to make sure that you're providing the feelings along with the facts.
Yeah, that's a much briefer way to say it than I did. Thank you for the brevity. And I do want to say this too. The person who wrote in on this said that they really thought they were a shoo-in. They still thought they did a good job. So, I mean, reflect on maybe what we just talked about. But I also would say, again, call the funder. It sounds like you have a good relationship, good enough that you got to this stage. Call them. And hopefully the funder will share with you at this stage. And some will never do that, but some will. And they might just be like, listen, whatever, fill in the blank. And it could be something completely unrelated to what we just talked about. Right? Like that's the other thing. I'm like, we're all just kind of trying to get in this funder's head. So maybe like start with, let's not try to read through the lines and create problems where they don't exist. But let's talk to the funder first. And let's think about this in terms of our organization and how we do this in the future. What constitutes client fraud and tips for handling fraudulent or potentially fraudulent activity? For example, a client requests rental help, and we suspect that the landlord listed on his lease is his partner, or the client is dishonest about other adults living in the household. What are tips for documenting fraud, this potential fraud, and how do we handle these kinds of situations with clients?
This is a fraught question. It's a really tough one to answer. And there's a couple of, so, I mean, I'll use some food bank examples because it's sort of similar. Like this is not an area that I'm super familiar with, rental assistance, but in the food bank, the way a food bank works, for those of you that aren't intimately familiar with it, is that the food bank acquires product, either purchases it or gets it donated, and then it gets distributed out to pantries. So agency pantries, which are a lot of times little mom and pop nonprofits or churches or elementary school not bathrooms, but like closets that may have some food that's available for people that need it. And there are rules that the food bank has to comply with about things like storage of food, or things like what you can and can't do with it. So, for example, one of the rules is if you're a church pantry, you can't require somebody to go through a church service in order to be fed. That's not allowed. You have to feed people without making them sit through a church service. If you're just a regular pantry or any kind of pantry, you can't charge people to receive the food. The food has to be distributed out at no cost at all. Like there can't be anything involved in charging the end recipient for that food. So there's specific rules that we would give to our agency partners, would say, you have to comply with these rules. And then because the reasons that we had to do those rules is a lot of times those were first of all, it's the right thing to do. And second thing is that we had donors that are giving us money that are also giving us these rules. So if we're getting product that's being given to us and the people that give us the product is taking a tax deduction, the rule is that product has to be distributed out free of charge all the way down the line. So our donor could get in trouble if the agency is doing it wrong. And so because of that, we had in order to become an agency partner, you had to go through an audit every once in a while. Every once in a while, somebody would show up and make sure that you were doing everything right. We had a secret shopper that would show up and say, okay, we've got a secret shopper who was at your agency, and we noticed that you made everybody do this weird thing first, and you're not allowed to do that, right? And so you're on probation, whatever, you could fix it with that kind of thing. I realize it's a little different when we're talking about end users, but with end users of the product, like there's still specific rules. If I give product to an agency who gives it to somebody, they can't just turn around and sell that out of the back of their truck. Like that's not allowed either. And we would want to clamp down on that by saying, yeah, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. You've been banned from this agency. You can't do it, like whatever that is. But I think barring some sort of like rules that you have with your recipients, the clients, if you have to be specific about the rules. And in this scenario where you've got like a landlord and a lease, and they're like actually getting rental assistance, and you think there's some fraud going on, it feels like there should be some sort of mechanism that your organization has in place to prevent that kind of thing from happening, like to find it. I mean, you're suspicious of it, which means that like, and also you're probably not the only people providing rental assistance. So talk to other people that also provide rental assistance and see what things they may have in place to help prevent this specific thing, along with documentation, that kind of stuff as well. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But it also kind of opens up the second problem, which is how much do we as an organization, how much should we be policing our end users? Like the people that are receiving our services, what's our role, both legally, but responsibility with our donors, but also morally? Like, is it for our organization? Is this important enough for me to like clamp down on it? Is it clearly like somebody's just doing it to make money off of us, and that's not the point of the organization? That's a legal thing that we're going to have to cut off, right? That for me would be very clear cut. Like somebody selling product out of the back of their truck, very clear cut for me. On the other hand, like occasionally at the food bank, we would get people that would be upset that some of the people that are receiving food from a pantry maybe weren't hungry enough. Like they're going to the pantry, but they could afford it. They just needed to get a second job at Target or whatever, right? So sometimes you'd get that kind of resistance. And as a food bank, we were very, very clear that this is donated food that's going out into the community. And as long as everybody's complying with the rules that we're providing on the donated food, like the end user, if they're taking it and they're using it at home, okay, that's their soul, right? That's not us. There's not a whole lot we can do to police that. And we also think that any of the things that we do to police it, anything that we do to provide like some sort of means testing for someone receiving food from a pantry, is naturally going to start excluding people who really do use it, because then it's too much of the line gets too long. I have to go through all this other stuff. They might, find out that my immigration status is not what it's supposed to be. And then ICE is knocking on my door. And so they go hungry. And the purpose of our organization was not to like make sure everybody's like doing legally what they're supposed to do or to be all up on somebody else's morals. It's to make sure people get fed. And so as an organization, we were clear, like, as long as that's happening, like, we're okay with that. So another example that was internal that we actually wrestled with a little bit more, and a lot of food banks wrestle with this one too, is like, what gets distributed through, where is our moral responsibility about nutrition for food that's going out of for the food bank, right? Right? Because one of the things like, so one of the ways that food gets into the food system is being picked up from supermarkets. So supermarkets, like, they've got all this stuff. After a while, it gets kind of tired and they can't sell it to anybody. So it goes into the food pantry. Like, so the food bank picks it up and drops it at a pantry, or some other way it gets out to an end user that way. The supermarket is going to get rid of everything, which includes everything in that bakery case, like all those demo cakes that they make. No, you walk by a supermarket, right? You go by the bakery and they've got all those cakes, and you're like, who's buying all these cakes all the time? Well, nobody does. And they end up in they're just there for display, really, because they don't have anything written on them, right? So they end up at a pantry, right? And so you'd have this conversation internally, like, should we be delivering cake from a supermarket because cake is probably not good for a hungry person, right? If nutrition is a challenge for them, and we're talking, because at one point the language in the food bank world changed from hunger to nutrition. Like we used to talk about hunger, and for some reason that felt like very third world. Like we don't have hungry people here. So we talked about like nutrition. Like the food stamp program now is called SNAP, which stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, right? So nutrition's like baked in, but it gets this weird connotation is that it has to be good for you, that we should only distribute product to hungry people that are good for you. And we'd have internal conversations about this at the food bank. And I swear to God, I shut down every single one of these every time. What if you were 7 years old and your family has to go to a food pantry to get its food and it's your birthday? Would you be happy to find a cake? And they'd be like, yeah, I'd be happy to find a cake. And that was like the end of the conversation. Like that we're not talking about nutrition again. Like, because you have to think about like what from a moral perspective, like what is your role in this? Your role in this instance was to make sure that end users were getting food, right? And if a cake made someone's day,
I
awesome.
really love the larger context of where you took this question, Andy, because I think many of us know doing your due diligence, setting up checks and balances, having a system, having clear rules, and communicating, yes, all important. But at what cost? Is that the cost of, is it overkill for whatever we're giving? Is it a barrier when we're trying to actually reduce? I mean, the sector is trying to oftentimes reduce barriers or create access, right? And creating like the more rules and hoops, and I get some of that is needed through government grant fund. Some of that has to exist. So I'm not saying do away with it, but I hear what you're saying is, to me, it feels like common humanity, like treating, I don't know, just common humanity. And let's be honest, like what is I don't know, I'd be very curious to know the ratio. And please, if someone's listening and has a different perspective or whatever, push back. But like, I'd be very curious to know the ratio of how many people actually try to take advantage of these systems, or if they are truly like just, I don't know, like in such desperation, or if they're right on the verge and they don't quite qualify, but they still, like, we also know there's a lot of those that aren't poor enough to get it, but that are right there on the cusp. Like, so at some point, how do we honor, like try to make our dollars and our resource go as far as possible, but honor the human and the integrity and not actually make it so difficult that we're going to actually go against the complete opposite direction of what we're trying to accomplish.
There was back in the 80s, there was when the first big push against welfare. There was a story that used to go around as part of a gotcha for the welfare system, which was there was this lady and she drove up to a food pantry in a Cadillac and she got food from the food pantry and she put it in her Cadillac and she drove away. And the gotcha was supposed to be, well, she's driving a Cadillac. Like she clearly doesn't need this food. And as a soundbite, sure, that maybe scored some points. But then when you actually look deeper into that situation, it's very plausible. Like imagine for a second that you're hungry. You lost your job. You have to pay rent because if you don't pay rent and you get behind on rent, you lose your house. Maybe you lost your house and the only place you have to live is your car. So now you're living in your car and you need food. Are you going to sell your car to go get more food? Or are you going to drive that car to the food pantry to be able to get food so that you can eat? So just because, the outward situation of somebody like isn't necessarily enough information to be able to say whether or not that person is deserving of your help. Like we said, there should be systems in place to prevent fraud. And when they're required by law, required by what the donors are telling you need to do, you absolutely need to comply with that. In this situation about rental assistance, I suspect there are probably some rules that prevent that. And so figuring out how to figure that situation out so that person doesn't necessarily take rental assistance that could be somebody going to somebody who isn't trying to cheat the system, that's probably a worthy goal. But I'd be cautious in just like, let's just make sure everybody that needs assistance deserves it. I think that's a slippery moral slope.
Hey there, listeners. We appreciate you listening to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. And we also appreciate all you do to make our world, our communities a better place each and every day. You make the world a better place. And that does not happen often, right? Especially in today's day and age when all you hear are the negative news stories and the media and the awful things. So thank you for giving us some hope and inspiration. You make us energized to do this podcast, and we just want to give you a shout out for that. And so as a friendly reminder or a very healthy nudge, I'm going to nag a little bit, like send us a question, right? This podcast works from your questions. As you know, it's all about the questions you send us. And so whatever's on your mind, no matter how big, no matter how small, if you don't have a question, but you heard one in your office or at your staff meeting or at your board meeting, you can even do that. Just don't tell us the names, right? Because we're not going to rat anybody out. So anyways, send us your questions. Again, you can find us nonprofiteverything.com, on the socials at Nonprofit Everything. You can, we've joked about Pigeon Carrier before. You can do that too. So with that said, thank you for joining, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.